The medical bay doors slid open with a soft hiss as the emergency transport glided through. Nurse Carla Tri looked up from her workstation, her pale blue skin shimmering under the bright lights. Her large black eyes focused on the human lying on the floating stretcher. She had never treated a human before. "Bring him to Bay 3, she called out, her voice melodic like wind chimes. The transport team moved quickly, transferring the injured man onto the medical table. Sergeant James Mitchell groaned as they lifted him. His military uniform was torn and burned. Dark patches covered his arms and chest where plasma fire had hit him. The smell of burned fabric and flesh filled the air. Carla Tri moved closer, her scanner beeping as it read his vital signs. The numbers made her worried. His heart was beating too fast. His breathing was shallow. 3 ribs were cracked, and she could see internal bleeding on her screen. "Well," James said suddenly, his voice rough but clear, "this is definitely not how I plan to spend my Tuesday." Carla Tri stopped moving. Her head turned toward him, confusion spreading across her features. Humans were supposed to be unconscious with injuries this bad. At least, that's what her medical book said. She picked up a small device and began scanning his burns. The plasma had hit him during a rescue mission when his ship's engine exploded. Second-degree burns covered 30% of his body. "The healing gel will help with the pain," she said softly, opening a container of blue liquid. "Pain?" James let out a weak laugh. "That's like calling a black hole slightly inconvenient. But hey, at least I'm getting the full alien medical experience, right?" Carla Tri's hand stopped moving. She looked at her scanner again. His stress levels were extremely high. His brain waves showed the jagged patterns she had learned about in school. The textbooks called it trauma-induced delirium. "You need to rest," she said, increasing the pain medication in his 4-line. "Your mind is trying to process what happened to you." "My mind processed it just fine," James replied, watching her work. "Boom, ouch, now I'm here getting the deluxe treatment from someone who looks like she stepped out of a beautiful dream. Could be worse." Carla Tri's scanner beeped louder. His neural activity was all wrong. Normal patients either screamed in pain or fell unconscious. They didn't make strange comments about dreams and explosions. She applied the healing gel to his worst burn, a patch on his shoulder where his uniform had melted to his skin. He flinched but didn't cry out. "You know," he said, looking at the glowing gel, "I always wondered what it would be like to be a walking night light. Now I know. It's exactly as glamorous as it sounds." Carla Tri stepped back. Her people, the Luminians, dealt with pain through silence and meditation. They turned inward, seeking peace in their minds until their bodies healed. This human was doing the opposite. He was making noise, saying things that made no sense. She checked his chart again. The transport team had found him trapped under metal debris for 6 hours before rescue arrived. That kind of trauma often caused mental breaks in other species. The mind simply couldn't handle the reality of what had happened. "I'm going to give you something to help you sleep," she said, preparing another injection. "Sleep sounds great," James agreed. "Though I have to warn you, I snore. It's been described as somewhere between a broken engine and a dying whale. My squad used to say it was the only thing scarier than enemy fire." She injected the sedative into his foreport. Most patients would be unconscious within minutes. But James kept talking. "You're very gentle," he said, his eyelids getting heavy. "Most field medics just slap some bandages on and call it good. This is like staying at a fancy hotel, except with more third-degree burns and fewer complimentary mints." Carla Tri made notes in his file. Patient shows signs of severe psychological distress. Inappropriate responses to trauma. Possible dissociative episode. Recommend psychiatric evaluation. As the sedative finally took effect, James's voice grew quieter. "Thanks for fixing me up, document. When I wake up, remind me to write a positive review. 5 stars, would nearly die here again." His eyes closed and his breathing became steady. Carla Tri stood over him, studying his peaceful face. Without the strange words and inappropriate laughter, he looked like what she expected. An injured soldier, young and far from home. She had treated hundreds of patients from dozens of species. Wounded warriors from the crystal cities of Vex Prime. Injured miners from the gas clouds of Kellyan. They all responded to trauma the same way. They became quiet, turned inward, focused on healing. But this human was different. Even unconscious, there was something in his expression that seemed almost amused. Like he was having a pleasant dream instead of recovering from a near-death experience. Carla Tri dimmed the lights and set the monitors to wake her if his condition changed. As she walked toward the door, she looked back one more time. Tomorrow she would contact the human medical staff for advice. Clearly, there was something wrong with Sergeant Mitchell's mind. She just hoped they could fix it before it got worse. The medical bay fell silent except for the soft beeping of machines and the gentle hum of life support. Outside the windows, stars moved slowly past as the space station continued its orbit around the distant planet below. 3 days had passed since James Mitchell arrived at the medical station. His burns were healing well under Carla Try's careful treatment, but his strange behavior was getting worse. At least, that's what she thought. Every morning when she entered his room, James would greet her with a smile and some odd comment that made no sense. Today was no different. "Good morning, Sergeant Mitchell," she said, checking his forebag. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a cargo ship," James replied cheerfully. "Which is funny because that's exactly what happened. So I guess my self-diagnosis skills are pretty good." Carla Try paused. He had been hit by debris from an exploding engine, not a cargo ship. Was his memory getting confused too? She moved to check the healing progress on his shoulder burn. The blue gel had worked well, and new pink skin was already forming. As she reached for her scanner, her elbow knocked over a tray of medical tools. Metal instruments crashed to the floor with a loud clatter. "Oh no," she whispered, quickly bending to pick them up. "Perfect," James announced from his bed. "Now we're both having coordination problems. This makes me feel so much better about dropping my weapon during the firefight." Carla Try stopped picking up the tools. She looked at him with wide eyes. How could he be happy about her mistake? And why was he comparing it to a battle situation? "I am sorry for the noise," she said quietly. "Don't be. It's nice to know I'm not the only one having a rough day. Though I have to say, your version of a rough day is much prettier than mine." She finished collecting the instruments and placed them in the cleaning unit. Her hands were shaking slightly. The medical database had warned her that human trauma patients might develop romantic fixations on their caregivers. Was that what was happening? Later that afternoon, she brought him his medication. James was trying to read a datapad, holding it at different angles and squinting. "These human medical reports are confusing," Carla Try said, noticing his struggle. "The anatomy charts are different from what I studied." "Try holding it upside down," James suggested. "That's how I feel most of the time anyway. Maybe it'll make more sense that way." Carla Try actually tried turning the pad upside down. Of course, it didn't help. When she looked back at James, he was grinning. "I was joking," he said gently. "Though I appreciate your willingness to try new approaches to medicine." Her blue skin darkened with embarrassment. Why did humans say things they didn't mean? Her people always spoke truth. Words were important. They shouldn't be wasted on false statements. That evening, Carla Try contacted Dr. Elena Hayes, the human medical officer stationed on level 7. The communication screen flickered on, showing a tired-looking woman with short brown hair. "Dr. Hayes, I need to discuss a patient with you," Carla Try began. "Of course. What's the problem?" "Sergeant James Mitchell. He was brought in 3 days ago with severe plasma burns and internal injuries. His physical recovery is progressing normally, but I'm concerned about his mental state." Dr. Hayes pulled up James's file on her screen. "His latest reports show good improvement. What mental symptoms are you observing?" "He makes inappropriate statements about his injuries. Today he told me his burns were giving him a fashionable glow, and that he always wanted to match his personality. Yesterday he said the scar on his arm looked like abstract art, and asked if I thought it would increase his value." Dr. Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Has he been following medical instructions? Taking his medication?" "Yes, but he treats everything like it's amusing. When I give him pain medication, he thanks me for the happy juice. When I change his bandages, he comments on my artistic wrapping skills. He seems unable to understand the seriousness of his condition." "Any signs of memory loss or confusion about where he is?" "No, his memory seems clear. But Dr. Hayes, he talks about traumatic events as if they were entertaining stories. He described being trapped under debris for 6 hours as an unexpected nap with a view of the stars. This cannot be normal human behavior." Dr. Hayes rubbed her forehead. "Carla Try, you've been doing excellent work with human patients. Let me review his brain scans and psychological evaluation scores. I'll get back to you tomorrow with recommendations." After ending the call, Carla Try returned to James's room for evening rounds. He was sitting up in bed, looking out the window at the stars. "Beautiful view," he said when she entered. "Though I have to admit, I preferred it better when I wasn't looking at it through a pile of twisted metal." You should not joke about nearly dying, Kalatrai said firmly. James turned to look at her. His expression became more serious. I'm not joking about nearly dying. I'm joking to keep from thinking too hard about nearly dying. There's a difference. I do not understand the difference. I know, James said softly. And I'm starting to realize that's causing you worry. I'm sorry about that. Kalatrai felt confused. He seemed genuinely concerned about her feelings, yet he continued the behavior that worried her. Nothing in her medical training had prepared her for this contradiction. She completed her evening checks in silence, making notes about his continued inappropriate emotional responses. Tomorrow she would have Dr. Hayes's recommendations. Maybe then she could help fix whatever was wrong with James's mind. As she prepared to leave, James spoke quietly. Nurse Kalatrai? Thank you for taking such good care of me. I know I'm probably not the easiest patient. She looked back at him. For a moment, his expression was completely serious, almost sad. Then he smiled again. Besides, where else would I get such personalized service from someone who glows like a beautiful star? Her skin flushed blue with embarrassment as she quickly left the room. The next morning brought the most difficult procedure yet. James had several pieces of metal shrapnel buried deep in his shoulder, too close to major blood vessels for the automated systems to handle. Kalatrai would have to remove them by hand using precision tools. She prepared her workspace carefully, laying out the tiny surgical instruments in perfect order. Her hands needed to be completely steady. One wrong move could cause serious bleeding that might kill him. This will be a delicate operation, she explained to James, adjusting the surgical light above his shoulder. The metal pieces are very close to important blood vessels. You must stay completely still. No problem, James replied, settling back against the pillows. I'll be as still as a statue. A really handsome statue with great hair. Kalatrai picked up the smallest surgical tool, a device no bigger than her finger. Through the magnifying screen, she could see the first piece of shrapnel. It was wedged between two muscles, just millimeters from a major artery. She began the careful process of loosening the metal fragment. James's vital signs showed his pain levels were high, but he remained motionless as promised. You know, he said as she worked, I always wondered what it would be like to be a human pincushion. Turns out it's exactly as fun as it sounds. Kalatrai's hand trembled slightly. How could he make jokes while she was performing surgery? She refocused on the task, gently working the metal free from the surrounding tissue. The first piece is almost out, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Great. Only 50 more to go. This is like the world's most painful treasure hunt. She successfully extracted the first fragment and placed it in a collection tray. The second piece was deeper and closer to the artery. Sweat formed on her forehead as she maneuvered the tool into position. Is this the part where you tell me I might feel a little pressure? James asked as she began working on the second piece. Because I'm pretty sure we sailed past little, and are now somewhere in enormous territory. Her tool slipped slightly. Not enough to cause damage, but enough to make her heart race. She took a deep breath and repositioned it. Almost there, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Take your time, James said. I'm not going anywhere. Though I have to say, this beats my last medical procedure. That doctor had hands like a gorilla and the bedside manner of an angry robot. The second piece came free cleanly. Kalatrai felt relief wash over her, but there were still 3 more fragments to remove. The largest one was the most dangerous, sitting right next to the main artery. As she began working on the third piece, James continued talking. You know what the funny thing is? Yesterday I was complaining about having boring guard duty. Nothing ever happens, I said. This assignment is going to put me to sleep. I should really be more careful what I wish for. Kalatrai's hands were shaking now. The combination of the delicate surgery and his constant inappropriate comments was making it hard to concentrate. Her people worked in silence during medical procedures. Silence helped the mind focus. The next piece is the most dangerous, she said, hoping he would understand the seriousness. Please be quiet. Of course. I'll be as silent as space itself. Which, fun fact, isn't actually silent because of cosmic radiation, but... Stop. Kalatrai's voice came out much louder than she intended. Her surgical tool clattered onto the tray as she stepped back from the table. James looked surprised. Did I do something wrong? Why won't you take this seriously? She demanded, her blue skin flashing bright with emotion. You nearly died. These injuries could have permanent effects. You might never be able to use your arm properly again. And all you do is make jokes. She was breathing hard, her large black eyes wide with frustration. I have been trying to help you for days, but you act like everything is amusing. You treat severe trauma like it's entertainment. I have documented clear signs of psychological breakdown, and I'm going to recommend immediate psychiatric treatment. The room fell completely silent. James stared at her, genuine shock on his face. Wait, he said slowly. You think I'm having a psychological breakdown? Yes. Your responses to pain and injury are completely abnormal. You make nonsensical statements. You laugh about things that should terrify you. No rational being behaves this way. James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. When he spoke again, his voice was much gentler. Kalatrai, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm just being human. What do you mean? The jokes, the comments about my injuries, the way I talk about what happened to me. That's not because I'm crazy or confused or in denial. It's how my species deals with bad situations. Kalatrai shook her head. That makes no sense. How can making light of serious problems be helpful? It's hard to explain, James said, looking up at the ceiling. But when something terrible happens to us, we have two choices. We can let it break us down, make us afraid and sad and angry. Or we can find a way to laugh at it, to take away its power to hurt us inside. But the danger is real. The pain is real. Of course it is. I know exactly how badly I'm hurt. I know I could have died. I know I might have permanent damage. His voice became softer. But I also know that if I spend all my time thinking about those things, they'll eat me alive from the inside. Kalatrai stared at him, confusion and frustration warring in her expression. So when I make jokes about being a pincushion or a nightlight, I'm not ignoring the reality. I'm choosing not to let the reality destroy me. Kalatrai slowly moved back to the surgical table, her hand still shaking slightly. She picked up her tool but didn't immediately resume the procedure. James's words echoed in her mind, but she struggled to understand them. You use humor as medicine? She asked, her voice uncertain. In a way, yes, James said, staying perfectly still as she positioned the tool near the third piece of shrapnel. It's not the only medicine we need, but it helps heal something that bandages and pain medication can't touch. What do you mean? James was quiet while she carefully extracted the third fragment. When it came free cleanly, he continued. Fear. Despair. The feeling that the universe is too big and too cruel and that we're too small to matter. Kalatrai placed the metal piece in the tray and moved to the fourth fragment. This one was smaller but in an awkward position. My people deal with trauma through meditation and silence. We turn inward to find peace. That sounds beautiful, James said sincerely. But humans are different. When we turn completely inward, sometimes we get lost in the dark places. The jokes and laughter help us remember that there's still light in the world. She worked in silence for several minutes, processing what he had said. The fourth piece came out easier than expected. Only one remained now, the largest and most dangerous one. I still don't understand how making fun of serious things can be healing, she admitted. James thought for a moment. Can I tell you about something that happened before I got injured? Kalatrai nodded, beginning the delicate work on the final fragment. 6 months ago, my unit was stationed on Kepler 442b. We were supposed to be doing routine patrol work, but we got caught in an ambush. Half my squad didn't make it out. His voice became quieter. The rest of us were trapped in a collapsed building for 3 days. No food, very little water, and we didn't know if anyone was coming to rescue us. The final piece of shrapnel was wedged tightly against the artery. Kalatrai worked with extreme care, her full attention focused on not causing damage. We were scared, James continued. Really scared. Some of the guys were crying. Others were angry, talking about revenge. And then Tommy started making jokes about the military's idea of luxury accommodations. He said the collapsed ceiling gave the place a rustic, open-air feeling, and that the dust in the air was natural aromatherapy. Despite her concentration on the surgery, Kalatrai found herself listening intently. Pretty soon, Sarah was doing impressions of our drill sergeant. Mike was making up ridiculous survival tips. We spent hours laughing until our sides hurt, and then laughing some more. And you know what happened? What? Kalatrai asked softly. We stopped being just scared. We were still afraid, but we weren't hopeless anymore. The laughter reminded us that we were still ourselves, still the people who cared about each other. It didn't change our situation, but it changed how we faced our situation. The final fragment shifted slightly. Carla held her breath and adjusted her grip on the tool. When the rescue team finally found us, we were weak and hurt, but our spirits weren't broken. The jokes didn't save our bodies, but they saved our souls. With extreme care, Carla worked the last piece of metal free. It came out smoothly, and she quickly checked the artery. No damage. She placed the final fragment in the tray and sealed the wound. The surgery is complete, she said, setting down her tools. All pieces have been removed successfully. Thank you, James said, his voice full of genuine gratitude. I know that wasn't easy. Carla sat in the chair beside his bed, her blue skin gradually returning to its normal pale shade as her stress decreased. So when you said your burns gave you a fashionable glow, you weren't confused about your condition? No. I was acknowledging that I was hurt while refusing to let the hurt define me. The burn is real, the pain is real, but so is my choice to find something positive in a bad situation. And when you called the scar on your arm abstract art? James smiled. I was deciding to see beauty instead of just damage. The scar will always be there, so I might as well appreciate it rather than hate it. Carla was quiet for a long time, thinking. Her species had always valued logic and order. Emotions were controlled, processed through meditation, and resolved in silence. The idea of facing trauma with laughter seemed chaotic and wrong. But she could see that James wasn't chaotic. He was calm, aware, and healing well. His jokes hadn't prevented him from following medical instructions or understanding his injuries. If anything, they seemed to help him cope better than many patients she had treated. This is very different from how my people handle pain, she said finally. Different doesn't mean wrong, James replied gently. Your meditation and silence work for you. Our laughter works for us. Maybe the important thing isn't how we cope, but that we find a way to keep going. You said humor helps heal what bandages cannot touch. What did you mean? James looked out the window at the stars beyond. When something terrible happens, it doesn't just hurt your body. It can hurt your hope, your sense that life is worth living, your belief that good things can still happen. Medicine can fix bones and burns, but it can't always fix a broken spirit. And laughter fixes broken spirits. Sometimes. It reminds us that even in the worst moments, we're still capable of joy. And if we can still feel joy, then we haven't lost everything that matters. Carla nodded slowly. For the first time since James had arrived, she was beginning to understand that his strange behavior wasn't a symptom of illness. It was a sign of strength. 2 weeks later, James was scheduled for discharge from the medical station. His burns had healed remarkably well, leaving only faint pink lines where the worst damage had been. His ribs showed no complications, and all the shrapnel had been successfully removed without lasting effects. But the biggest change wasn't in James. It was in Carla. Good morning, Sergeant Mitchell, she said as she entered his room for the final examination. Her usual calm demeanor seemed slightly nervous today. Good morning, Nurse Carla. Ready to get rid of your most talkative patient? Actually, she said, checking his chart one last time, I have been practicing something. James raised an eyebrow. Practicing what? Carla's blue skin flickered with embarrassment. Human-style humor. Dr. Hayes suggested it might help me understand future human patients better. Oh, this should be good, James said, grinning. Let's hear it. She took a deep breath, clearly nervous. I believe you are feeling better because you are no longer glowing like a broken light fixture. James burst into laughter. That was terrible. And wonderful. And completely accurate. Carla's skin shifted through several colors rapidly, showing her mix of embarrassment and pride. Dr. Hayes said humor requires much practice. The best kind usually does. Here, want to try a classic human joke? She nodded eagerly. Why don't aliens ever land at airports? Carla considered this with the same seriousness she applied to medical procedures. Because they would need to file proper landing documentation with station authorities. Because they are looking for space. James announced. Get it? Space to land, but they're also from space. Her head tilted in confusion. I do not understand why linguistic confusion is amusing. It's called a pun. The humor comes from words having multiple meanings. It's funny because it's unexpected. Ah. Carla's large black eyes brightened with understanding. The amusement derives from semantic ambiguity. She paused, then said carefully, why do human medical patients make poor comedians? James leaned forward with interest. I don't know, why? because their delivery is always painful. This time James's laughter was so loud that it brought Dr. Hayes running from the corridor outside. She appeared in the doorway, looking concerned. "What's happening in here? Is everything all right?" "Carla just made a medical pun," James explained, wiping tears from his eyes. Dr. Hayes stared at the Luminian nurse in amazement. "Carla made a joke? An actual joke?" "I am learning to be less rigid in my thinking patterns," Carla said solemnly, which only made James laugh harder. Word of the unlikely friendship had already begun spreading throughout the medical station. Other staff members had started requesting information about human coping mechanisms. The station's xenopsychology department had even asked Carla to write a report about her observations. As James packed his few belongings, Carla watched quietly. After 2 weeks of constant conversation, the room would soon be silent again. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her medical kit. She pulled out a small crystal pendant, no bigger than James's thumb. It glowed with soft blue light, the same color as her skin when she was calm. "This is a traditional Luminian healing charm," she explained. "We give them to patients who have taught us something important." James accepted the crystal carefully. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with gentle energy. "It's beautiful. What did I teach you? That strength comes in many forms. My people believe that true healing requires perfect silence and inner peace. But you showed me that sometimes, healing requires making noise. Sometimes it requires refusing to be quiet about pain." She moved to the window, looking out at the stars. "I always thought that acknowledging suffering meant focusing on it completely, giving it your full attention until it passed. But you taught me that acknowledging suffering can also mean choosing not to let it have the final word." James clipped the crystal to his uniform. "You taught me something too." "What's that?" "That understanding doesn't always happen quickly. You could have dismissed me as crazy and moved on. Instead, you kept trying to figure out why I acted the way I did. That kind of patience and curiosity is its own form of courage." Dr. Hayes had been listening from the doorway. She stepped into the room, smiling. "Carla, you've been getting requests from several departments about cross-species medical training. They want to learn about human emotional responses to trauma." "I would be happy to share what I have learned," Carla replied. "Though I suspect I have much more to learn myself." As James prepared to leave, he turned back to her one final time. "Remember, if you get another human patient who seems to be cracking jokes instead of just cracking up, that's not a malfunction in our programming. It is a feature," Carla finished, her skin glowing warm amber with understanding. "Laughter is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of hope." James smiled as he headed toward the docking bay. Behind him, he could hear Carla greeting her next patient, a human engineer who had broken his arm in a maintenance accident. "Good morning," she said carefully. "I understand that you may be experiencing significant discomfort, but please know that humorous responses to trauma are a normal human coping mechanism, and I will not mistake them for psychological distress." The engineer's confused, "Okay," followed James down the corridor. He chuckled to himself as he walked toward the transport shuttle. Some lessons, he thought, took time to perfect. But the important thing was that people were willing to learn them. As the shuttle doors closed behind him, James touched the crystal pendant one more time. It pulsed with gentle light, a reminder that healing could take many forms, and understanding could bridge even the widest gaps between species. The shuttle pulled away from the station, carrying him toward his next assignment. But part of him would always remain in that medical bay, where a curious alien nurse had learned that sometimes the best medicine came not from silence, but from the simple human art of laughing in the face of the impossible.